If Washington is consumed by domestic politics, who is actually steering the relationship with China? Washington and Beijing recently agreed to keep the peace, but American foreign policy rarely runs on diplomatic promises alone. Published on June 5, 2026, the Diplomat's analysis asks why the Democratic Party struggles to form a coherent China strategy, even as it eyes a midterm victory. As November draws closer, the diagnosis points to a problem that outlasts any single election cycle. By tracking the disappearance of big-picture thinkers and the rise of a reactive political machine, the framework provides a clear lens for watching the upcoming campaign season unfold. Written by Li Chenyao in The Diplomat. Narrated for Arva.
Can Washington and Beijing sustain their hard-won détente? On May 14th, the two nations' leaders agreed to pursue a relationship based on constructive strategic stability, a framework emphasizing managed competition and durable peace. Yet in Washington's corridors of power, the machinery of confrontation grinds on. Congressional hawks sharpen legislative knives. Bureaucrats draft fresh sanctions. Beneath the surface calm of summit diplomacy, powerful currents are pulling in the opposite direction. However, if Democrats ride a blue wave to reclaim the House in November's midterms, a distinct possibility, the party will continue to struggle to formulate an alternative China policy. Three significant deficiencies plague the Democratic foreign policy apparatus: the extinction of grand strategic thinking among the U.S. technocratic elite, a domestic narrative vacuum that corrodes the Democratic Party's diplomatic foundations, and the institutional chaos likely to follow a split government. Together, these factors will render U.S.-China policy dangerously volatile after the midterm elections. The lack of grand strategists. U.S. foreign policy today suffers from what might be called strategic anemia. The Cold War produced thinkers like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, individuals capable of weaving history, geography, and military power into coherent global visions. They operated within a compact National Security Council, NSC, structure that encouraged synthetic thinking and provided direct access to presidential decision-making. That ecosystem has collapsed. The contemporary NSC has ballooned into an unwieldy bureaucracy consumed by interagency coordination and crisis management. Grand strategy has been crowded out by process.
Meanwhile, academic specialization has fragmented expertise into narrow silos. Scholars who master semiconductor supply chains rarely engage with Chinese intellectual history. Those who study China's military doctrine seldom grapple with domestic political economy. This disciplinary segmentation has proved incapable of producing the cross-cutting strategic minds that momentous power transitions demand. The consequences are visible across the China expert community. Rush Doshi offers rigorous analysis of long-term China-U.S. competition, but operates within a framework where confrontation is predetermined. Susan Shirk, Jessica Chen Weiss, and Michael Swain emphasize crisis management and diplomatic engagement, warning against excessive hostility. Michael Pillsbury remains trapped in Cold War antagonism. David Shambaugh tracks Chinese domestic politics, while Jude Blanchett focuses narrowly on technology and industrial policy. Each perspective has merit. None provides an integrated vision. This fragmentation means the rising generation of policy practitioners lacks deep contextual understanding of China. These experts, technically sophisticated, often holding advanced degrees in quantitative methods, approach export controls and technology restrictions with engineering precision, but little appreciation for how these measures interact with Chinese political dynamics or regional economic integration. Their decisions become mechanistic, transforming technical questions into absolute security threats. The strategic elasticity that once allowed for calibrated engagement has been replaced by an increasingly rigid posture.
The domestic deficiency, the Democratic Party's own internal dysfunction, has become a direct liability for U.S. foreign policy. The Democratic National Committee's recently leaked post-election autopsy identified a devastating failure. The campaign for presidential candidate Kamala Harris could not explain why voters should support her. Instead, her campaign relied on the assumption that the electorate would naturally reject Donald Trump, neglecting to construct a positive, affirmative narrative. Missteps on cultural issues compounded the problem. This dynamic continues today. The Democratic Party has repeatedly proven unable to weld a loose anti-Trump coalition into a durable governing majority with a shared vision. And this domestic narrative vacuum directly corrodes the party's China policy foundations. While the American academic and strategic establishment disproportionately favors Democratic politicians, valuing their rhetorical respect for expertise and their rejection of Trumpian anti-intellectualism, the Democrats have demonstrated no superior wisdom on China. Unable to articulate what kind of domestic order they would build or what development model they offer, they cannot formulate a logically coherent China strategy that transcends containment. The result is a hollow hawkishness. To prove they are tough enough on China and immunize themselves against Republican attacks, Democrats have joined a race toward ever stricter postures. They rarely consider long-term frameworks for bilateral relations. Containment, restriction, and punishment become not means but ends.
This reactive posture surrenders any capacity to actively shape the trajectory of the relationship, leaving periodic diplomatic stabilization efforts without durable domestic political support. Lame duck chaos and bureaucratic inertia. The history of China-U.S. relations teaches a sobering lesson. Summit agreements matter, but the distance between high-level amity and working-level political trust can be vast. Even when U.S. President Donald Trump personally favors maintaining broad stability with Beijing, the Washington bureaucracy operates according to its own institutional logic. Congress, the Department of Defense, and national security agencies, steeped in years of competitive narrative, have built self-sustaining mechanisms for hardline policy. Entity lists and technology barriers continue with considerable autonomy, regardless of White House signaling. This bureaucratic inertia can dilute and even undermine presidential commitments. Specific restrictions often advance without full presidential awareness or attention, crafted by mid-level technocrats exercising delegated authority. When Beijing responds with reciprocal countermeasures, these reactions are readily framed on Capitol Hill and in media commentary as evidence of aggression, providing fresh political legitimacy for further restrictions. A self-reinforcing cycle takes hold. Dynamics following the midterm elections will amplify these risks. If a blue wave delivers the House of Representatives to Democrats, the Trump administration enters classic lame duck territory. The House will likely devote itself to investigations of the administration and even impeachment proceedings. Partisan warfare will reach fever pitch.
In this environment, policy coherence and execution capability will be consumed by internal conflict. High-level strategic communication, intended to stabilize the broader China-U.S. relationship, will be repeatedly disrupted by domestic political shocks. Trade negotiations and technology cooperation agreements will see their credibility and durability severely eroded. Any attempt to improve relations will be instantly branded as appeasement by the opposition party. Bilateral relations will face unpredictable microcrises rather than well-managed strategic competition. 2028 and the Democratic battle for China policy. With the House potentially in Democratic hands after 2026, attention will shift to the 2028 presidential contest. Within the party, a latent struggle over China policy will surface. Two broad factions are discernible. The first comprises pragmatic cooperators, represented by figures like California Governor Gavin Newsom. Drawing on experience with subnational economic engagement, this faction emphasizes climate cooperation, clean energy development, and local trade ties with China. They view full-scale economic and technological decoupling as impractical and self-damaging. They prefer de-risking over decoupling, seeking to maintain basic cooperation in non-sensitive domains. Should this faction prevail, a Democratic administration might pursue something resembling a separation regime, security concerns addressed through targeted restrictions, with economic engagement preserved where feasible. The second faction consists of technocratic competitors rooted in the NSC, Commerce Department, and allied agencies. These younger policy professionals embrace strategic competition with China as a defining framework. They may reject Republican populist rhetoric, but they believe future geopolitics will be determined by technological primacy. They advocate precise, airtight containment across semiconductor supply chains, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biopharmaceuticals. They favor detailed regulations and multilateral coordination mechanisms to construct exclusive technology and standards alliances. For them, constructive strategic stability merely provides guardrails to prevent conflict. Within those guardrails, technological suppression should proceed without respite. Several scenarios emerge from this factional competition. If a Democratic nominee capitulates to technocratic dominance to avoid appearing soft, future policy will take the form of highly legalized, institutionalized cold competition, stable on the surface, but systematically suffocating space for technological exchange. If pragmatic voices prevail, they may pursue a dual-track approach, maintaining inherited restrictions in sensitive technology domains while actively seeking renewed institutional dialogue on macroeconomic coordination, climate governance, and financial stability. This scenario offers modest but meaningful predictability. In the worst-case scenario, Democrats, unable to forge internal consensus and facing relentless Republican pressure, abandon strategic initiative entirely, using ever harsher China legislation as domestic political currency. Strategic rationality would evaporate, and bilateral relations would descend into chronic friction and turbulence. Conclusion. The May 2026 China-US Leaders Agreement on Constructive Strategic Stability demonstrated genuine political wisdom amid complex crosscurrents. Yet Washington's political machinery operates according to rhythms largely detached from diplomatic necessities. The fragmentation of the United States' strategic brain, the Democratic Party's narrative vacuum, and the partisan warfare likely following November's elections all point toward persistent structural impediments to stable bilateral relations. The challenge ahead lies not merely in managing competition between two great powers, but in navigating the increasingly unpredictable internal dynamics of one of them. For policymakers in Beijing and across the Asia-Pacific, the task will be to distinguish durable U.S. interests from the transient chaos of its political seasons, and to structure engagement accordingly.